It's episode 6 of the Exit Philosophy podcast. Richard Griffin, we call him Griff. I'm Scott MacArthur. You can call me Scotty Mac, although you don't have to if you don't want to. And we're going to get into the fallout from the Anthony Bass situation, because when we left off last week, as it turns out, only a small part of the whole thing had happened. We figured most of it had happened. The Jays had other ideas, so we'll touch on that. I've got a theory about these Toronto Blue Jays I'm going to run by Griff. More to come on those issues and others. But first, a big-time shout-out to Nick Taylor, who won the Canadian Open, Griff. Good for club, good for country, brother.
Yeah, I went out there on Friday around 2 with my daughter Shannon. She got the tickets, and we wandered around the course. And, of course, we followed the Canadians a lot. And I thought Nick Taylor was playing well, but he was so far back at that point that I think he only made the cut by one stroke. But he was playing well. And so there was that. And then Saturday and Sunday was crazy with him. He was 8 under, and then he posted enough to get into a playoff. And what a playoff, and what a result that was. And what it reminded me of, with all the Canadian golfers greenside, including Adam Hadwin, what it reminded me of was the camaraderie among Canadian Major League Baseball players. It's like we are them, but we are also us. And I think that makes the Canadian experience in both golf and baseball and other sports unique. And hockey, there's so many that are Canadian. It's different. But this is a minority on the golf tour and a minority in baseball. And I recognize that same feeling greenside. And I think Adam Hadwin did too. But you saw that. You described that.
Well, that was perfect. Like, so Adam Hadwin's a permanent GIF now, right? Like a permanent meme of some kind. But the first person I noticed in all the footage was Mike Weir, which really is awesome, because it's 20 years. You got to go back to April for the exact date, but it's 20 years since Weir won the Masters. And I think it's fair to say, Griff, that Weir's accomplishment at Augusta National 20 years ago would have served as some level of inspiration for the younger Canadian golfers of today. And without doubt, there are young kids, adolescents playing golf right now who would watch what Nick Taylor did in our national tournament on the weekend. And if they go on to accomplish something big, win a massive tournament or win a major 10, 15, 20 years down the road, what Nick Taylor did yesterday, as we sit here on Monday morning, June the 12th, will be something that inspired them. So that was awesome. And then, of course, Adam Hadwin. So the other thing, like, Adam Hadwin wasn't dressed like a golfer. You know, wasn't an overly hot day. It was kind of overcast, all that stuff. He had a hoodie on. He had a hat pulled down. And he's got a champagne bottle, so he freaks out when Taylor wins, and he rushes the green. Mike Weir, you see him in the footage. Hadwin's doing the whole spray in the champagne bottle, and there comes security and police to just, like, it's like Bill Goldberg circa 1998, just spear him right into the turf. You want to talk about leaving a ball mark? There's probably a body mark on the 18th. And they were ready to, like, turn him over and cuff him. And then Weir and, like, a handful of others were like, that's Adam Hadwin, and he's allowed to be here. He's allowed to be. And they were all like, because, you know, when you're security, you can't err on the side of the benefit of the doubt. You have to err on the side of caution. But there is also a bit of that hero complex, like, I want to be Batman or Superman. I want to save the conquering hero from a potential attack, right? So all that factors in a split second. Hilarious.
But the thing about that is, if you're the security guy, you have to notice that there's a gathering of about 10 Canadian golfers, and somebody in your group has got to go, oh yeah, those are the rest of the guys. So when one breaks from that group, you don't head for them and put a perfect shoulder tackle into them. And I'm sure they're going to have to put a chalk outline on the green so that people get a drop, because as you said, there is a body mark on the green right now. But that entire incident was so great for golf, for sports in Canada. And it wouldn't have been the same if Nick Taylor had missed his putt, left it on the lip, tapped it in, and then the tournament had been won if Tommy Fleetwood missed his 12-footer to tie. That would not have been the same reaction. So it's epic that he nailed a 72-footer for the victory, and Hadwin was tackled to the ground by an over-enthusiastic security guy. But what a weekend for golf in Canada.
Well, and part of it, because it was such a long putt, that gave time for the suspense to build as the ball was rolling toward the hole. And you see Mike Weir, Hadwin was like almost in a catcher's crouch. And it's going, so just the entire, the spectacle of it, right? These things you can't write, like, Tiger's epic chip in, was it 08 at the Masters, or I got to go back even way further. Might have been 25 years ago for all I know. I can't, but the one I'm talking about. Yeah.
Rolling down the hill and then sitting on the lip with the label of the ball showing and then dropping. Yeah. But that whole scene with the cameras cutting back and forth and the time, because as you said, the 72-foot putt was creeping its way to the hole, reminded me of the final scene from Happy Gilmore, where he sinks it off the TV tower, and the guy brings the whole thing down and the ball goes in. That was similar, minus security knocking Happy to the ground, although he had done it to Bob Barker earlier in the movie.
Yeah, Happy Gilmore's winning stroke in that movie actually gave me hope as a golfer, because when I get out there, which is way less frequently than it used to be, that's what it looks like. That's what it looks like.
Yes. Anyway, it was great. It was a great weekend for golf, a great weekend for sports in Canada. And the fact that the Jays came back on the Sunday with Kevin Biggio, who's one of my favorite players, hitting a 3-run homer to win it. And he's not had a good year, and he is sort of one of the guys in jeopardy moving forward. That was a great finish to the weekend for the Blue Jays.
Right. And when we talk about the Biggio home run, since you brought it up, Griff, like when I say this, I think people, whether it's me or somebody else, people are automatically reactionary and say, well, you're taking away credit from Kevin Biggio. I mean, that Emilio Pagan was not looking to put a 95-mile-an-hour fastball in the lower left quadrant of the plate to a left-handed hitter. With Kevin Biggio, the book is velocity at or above the belt, right? And so that's probably where that fastball was supposed to go. But hitting a baseball that's being thrown 95 to 100 miles per hour from 60 feet 6 inches away is a really difficult thing to do, even for the very best baseball players in the world. This sport is built around capitalizing on the mistakes that your opponent makes. So Emilio Pagan made a mistake, didn't locate that fastball, and Kevin Biggio did exactly what he had to do with that pitch, and he salvaged a game and therefore somewhat salvaged a series for a team that has been up against it. Despite the fact that coming into the Minnesota series, they'd been playing well on the field, they'd been up against it off the field, tons of distraction. That's a big-time home run, and it might not be one that we look back on the final week of September, Griff, when this team is in presumably the wild card race. Could be the division race if they get hot in Tampa Bay Craters, but presumably the wild card race. Whether we look back on this or not, it is a crucial home run at this time in the season.
Right. And I think that one of the overreactions is to call the first two losses. And I said this to John Schneider in the postgame last night in the interview room, is to call the distraction of Anthony Bass of that situation the reason for the first two losses in that series. I mean, as you point out, it's a game of mistakes. It's a game of if the pitcher makes a mistake and you take advantage, very difficult thing to do. But on Friday, they had runners at second and third in the ninth inning with nobody out, and they couldn't score that run, and they lost in extra innings. So is that a distraction, or is that just three guys did not come through at that point? And then the next day, and as I pointed out to John Schneider, you screwed up the bullpen. You know, you misused the bullpen. And he looked like, what? I said, yeah. Otherwise, that game was a 3-1 lead in bottom of the eighth or in the top of the eighth. And that game was in hand. And then you brought Adam Simber in. And he didn't take well to that question, but he answered it. So that's not distraction.
What was he
that's
doing there, Griff? He didn't have Romano, right?
No, Romano was up. Romano was up until the Twins took the lead. Right. Romano was throwing. He was going to pitch the ninth if they. So
he didn't have Swanson. He didn't have.
Right. Yeah, he only had the one guy, the closer. Right. When the closing situation no longer existed, he sat down. And then the game got away because Mitch White came in, who probably shouldn't be at the major league level at this point, and he gave up a 3-run homer. So it wasn't a 9-4 game as much as it was a 3-1 lead that they blew. But that's not distraction. Neither of those games was distraction. And then they won a game they probably should have lost because Kevin Biggio came through with the 3-run bomb. I don't know if Brandon Belt would have done that, but.
Well, I tell you what, if Pagone had put that pitch right there with Brandon Belt, he might have whacked it too. But as we know, at or above the belt velocity, you might be able to get Brandon Belt as well. Even though he's on base like 50% of the time over the last 5-6 weeks, it feels like guys on base all the time.
More than half of Brandon Belt's plate appearances result in a ball not in play. So walks and strikeouts combined is more than half his plate appearances. And he's been tremendous over the last month, maybe a little more, but it's a long season, so we'll see how that plays out. But the fact that he had pulled a hamstring the night before allowed Kevin Biggio to play first base, and it turned out well for the Jays.
Your son Pat is going to crush us for this, or maybe more specifically me. Because as I said to Pat, I don't remember anything anymore, so I have to write things down to remind myself. But we need to pump griffsthepitch.com.
Oh yeah.
He's like, guy, he texts us last night. Guys, out of the gate, you need to pump A, B, C, D, and E. Don't waste any time. So griffsthepitch.com, that is your work on Substack. Fire Griff a subscription. You can fire him a little coin as well for the entirety of his work. You get multiple columns per week. You get weekly MLB rankings 1 through 30. Griff ranks the power rankings of the 30 teams. You get this podcast for free. And you also get some of Griff's interviews with former Expos and former Blue Jays. It's great content, and you pump it out consistently.
We got Darren Fletcher from his home in Illinois coming out this week. I did it at the end of last week, and it's a great interview. Darren Fletcher, one of my favorite players, played for both the Expos and the Blue Jays, and it's a great interview, and it's coming out later this week.
My recollection of Fletcher post-playing, Griff, is that he did some color analysis on a handful of Jays broadcasts.
Yeah,
I thought he was pretty good. But obviously he didn't really do anything more than dip his toes into that. Like, was it not a passion of his, or he just got on about life? Because I always enjoyed his analysis when he talked about it, and I asked him about that early in the interview, and he talked about it and his desire now to get back into it somehow. There's always an opportunity if you're good. I think the feeling at the time was that he was
He wasn't maybe controversial enough. He wasn't strong enough. But his personality, you can't just fake your personality, you know. At the time when he did a few telecasts and radio games, he was busy with his young family. Now they're older.
Yep.
He was coaching his son in baseball in Illinois, near, you know, it's not really a suburb of Chicago, but it's close. It's the closest major city. And so he was busy at the time, and he didn't have time for a full schedule. But he says now he's ready to go if anybody's looking for him to join their broadcast team. And I agree with you. I think he was pretty good when he did it.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, what was it? He was a catcher, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Buck Martinez, Joe Siddle. You
Caleb
look around
Joseph.
Major League. You look around Major League Baseball. There's a lot of ex-catchers who are doing this, and it's because they're the one position player who is involved in every single pitch, right? And they see the game from a different. What's that?
You're stealing his thunder, because we talked about that too. So he has his opinions on that, and they jibe with pretty much anybody who's been around the game and understands why these guys see the game in a different way. And I think that he will get an opportunity. I'm not sure whether it's with the Blue Jays or whatever, but he was a Dodger, he was a Philly, he was an Expo and a Blue Jay. And so, you know, he has enough friends around the game that respect his personality and his opinions. I think he'll get his shot. But it's a great interview, and people should subscribe.
Griff's the Pitch.
GriffsThePitch.com.
GriffsThePitch.com.
My son will be happy.
Yes.
That we plugged it.
Well, he'll be mad that it took me 13 or 14 minutes to bring it up, but we kicked it off with the Canadian Open, Nick Taylor, and all that. We digressed before we even began. Can you digress before you've even started talking? I don't know.
Yeah, we just gressed, I think.
Yeah, we gressed. Yeah. Well, we certainly have regressed. There's no
question. God, yeah.
Now we got to progress. So, look, the Anthony Bass situation came to a head, and the Jays DFA'd him, and we talked about what we knew to that point a week ago, because we record on Mondays, and we're talking to you here on Monday morning, June the 12th. So Bass was let go late last week, and this was after Ross Atkins had made himself available to the media Thursday afternoon, and Anthony Bass then held court within about a half an hour of that.
Yeah, earlier in the day had been the exclusives by Shai Davidi, and that
he met with Pride Toronto. Yeah,
right, and that he was available to catch the first pitch on Friday from the president of Pride. So
So Bass had spoken to Sherwin Modeste, the head of Pride Toronto, and Ross Atkins came out and he said, "Look, Ross, Anthony doesn't hate anybody." Da 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 da. Bass comes out about 30 minutes later, and look, I've just been conditioned through the years to, at best, take what Ross Atkins says publicly with a grain of salt. Sometimes it's outright lying. Grain of salt at best. Bass referred to decisions, implying, I took this as a gay man, implying that being gay, being queer is a choice, and essentially doubled and tripled down. I'm entitled to my beliefs, da-da-da-da-da. Well, of course you're entitled to your beliefs. That doesn't mean that you won't face consequences for those beliefs. And one could argue that the consequence of losing your job but getting your full salary for the remainder of the season, which he will by being DFA'd, and then he can go sign with somebody else for the major league minimum and you know, make more money, pitch for another team. One could argue that those consequences aren't all that stiff and that he's not being canceled. But he is entitled to believe what he believes. The messaging, though, ran in direct contrast to what Ross Atkins had proliferated just minutes earlier, Griff. And I have to think that was the moment where the general manager realized, geez, I've been treading water with this over the last week and a half. and the player just absolutely pantsed me in front of everybody. And it must have been at that moment that they were going to walk away from him.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that timing, because when Ross Atkins came out for his scheduled 3:00 briefing with the media, it was playing off of what was in the paper and online with Shy and CP that morning. And Ross thought that that was the only thing he had to work with or work against. And then in the meantime, the media had talked to the Blue Jays about making Bass available to finally answer questions, not just make a statement, but answer questions. And he came out after Ross, and I don't think Ross Atkins was aware that this was going to happen. And as you said, he just totally went against things that Ross had said about the authenticity of the apology, about the sincerity of what he did. And the question was brought up, well, you took down the post. And he said, well, yeah, because it was a distraction. I realized it was a distraction, so I took it down. And then the next question was, but then you put it back up. And he said, well, it's my beliefs. So I just wanted people to know that it was my beliefs, and I still believe that. I think at that point, there was no redemption song here. There was no chance for Ross Atkins to come back. It wasn't a tennis match. It was like, as you said, this is pro sports is totally unique in the workplace. Like, you get paid the rest of your salary, and most of the time when you're a reliever of Anthony Bass's caliber, you're going from team to team to team throughout your career. So there's no real punishment except for the fact that you will not be wearing a Toronto Blue Jays jersey the rest of this season. And other teams that may want to sign you have this as a caveat to your personality and what they will be getting when they sign you to a future contract. But there's no repercussions from the team other than, pack your bags and good luck to you the rest of your career. That's all.
And Bass is gone, and at some point we're not going to have to utter his name anymore. But the handling of all of this, Griff, struck me as absurd, and it was incompetent. And the funny thing is that sometimes it's difficult to differentiate between incompetence and whether something is sinister, because it's almost impossible to believe that the president of a Major League Baseball team and the general manager of a Major League Baseball team could be so incompetent on something like this. Therefore, there must be ill intent or evil intent. I don't think that's what happened here. I think this was just handled purely incompetently. And I'm going to say this. These are my words. People who have worked for the team and people who have covered this team have had doubts, suspicions, personal experiences with this front office for years. And it was always, well, they're building a pretty good baseball team with a winning record every year, and they're always in playoff contention. Let's just see this play out. I'm not even about the nationality stuff. More Americans have run these Blue Jays teams through the years than Canadians have. I don't care about any of that. I don't like this import-export stuff. I'm talking about all we hear from Mark Shapiro and Ross Atkins are HR corporate speak buzzwords like our culture, our values, open door policy, et cetera, et cetera. And those are all words that play well in boardrooms and manage up. But when the shit hits the fan and there's spaghetti all over the wall and you can't clean it up, when it is an easy mess to clean up if you very simply care and you're very simply human, what's revealed is that words like culture and values are just that, words, because they're not reflected in actions. And this was an epic failure by the front office of the Toronto Blue Jays. Mark Shapiro, Ross Atkins wear this. And I speak as a gay man who observed this from afar while talking to a number of people much closer to it than I am now. There was a whole whack of cowardice involved in this too. It was an ass-covering, buck-passing operation. Mark Shapiro never spoke because Ross is the guy who's supposed to speak. And Ross Atkins wants to tell you that John Schneider is the face of the franchise. John Schneider was the only one who spoke eloquently and authentically about this. And that was the first day. Everybody else was covering ass and buck passing. That's not a healthy culture, and those aren't values that real people should adhere to in everyday life.
Just to play devil's advocate here, in terms of, yes, that should have been handled right away. It should have been accelerated. The eventual outcome of Anthony Bass being sent on his way should have happened much earlier. But having been around the game as long as I have, when it was family-owned businesses, which was through the 80s, most major league teams were family-owned, and then it became too big, too expensive, so it went corporate. So when it was family-owned, there was that human touch, that human relationship between ownership and players, and that it hasn't been the same. It's been corporate culture and that sort of thing since then. But the moment this happened, the Blue Jays, I believe, felt they had to consult others. They had to consult Major League Baseball to see what they could do. And Billy Beane was hired. He's an openly gay player, former player. He was hired as a VP just for this sort of thing, and we never heard from him at all. So maybe the Blue Jays felt they had to consult there. They had to consult the players union, because you can't just punish people these days if there's something covering it in the collective bargaining agreement. And then the other thing, which is sort of down below all that, is maybe the agency of Anthony Bass, maybe the Blue Jays are interested in other clients from that agency. Maybe they have to take that into consideration. The only other player from the same agency was Tyler Hanneman. So that's not a factor on this current club. But there are other issues that don't make it right, but I could see them as reasons why they didn't do something immediately, even though it should have been, even though every step they took after that didn't turn out well and led to the next step, which then eventually led to his being released.
Right. But my issue is that they were deliberately obtuse.
Oh, like yeah.
If you go back to 2017, when Kevin Pillar, in a moment of frustration in the batter's box, screamed the three-letter F word at Jason Mott, who was then a relief pitcher for the Atlanta Braves, Ross Atkins flew from Toronto to Atlanta to deal with it. Kevin Pillar was suspended for a couple of days, but to Kevin Pillar's credit, and I had my own show on TSN 1050 at the time, and I did the first 20 minutes without a commercial on the topic the next day. I didn't call for Kevin Pillar to be released. I remember clearly what I said, and keep in mind, at that time in my life, I was not out publicly. I was living my authentic life personally, but the broader audience didn't know yet, and it would be another couple of years until then. But I said, this is a chance for growth. And you know what Kevin Pillar did, to Kevin Pillar's credit? He put in the work. And, whether he's grown from that experience today, I mean, we'd only have to ask him now, but I mean, there have been no trip-ups since. And anytime I talked to Kevin Pillar when I was in the clubhouse through those years, he was a pretty accessible guy, pretty amicable guy. I didn't think Kevin Pillar was a bad dude, but this was much worse. The act, the insidious choice. Like, Kevin Pillar blurted something out in frustration. That might tell you that word, the three-letter F word's on the tip of his tongue because it comes out when he's frustrated. But Anthony Bass made a choice and then pulled it down, the reposting, then put it back up, et cetera, as time went on. This was worse. And to me, there was a result here, Griff, that there was a potential result here, I should say, that involved keeping Anthony Bass on the team. But the lack of authenticity sprinkled throughout all of this, starting with that apology from Bass, which we covered last week on the podcast because it had happened by that point, combined with Ross Atkins. It's almost like Ross Atkins wasn't even aware what Anthony Bass had said or had been saying. No, I don't think Anthony, like even after they DFA'd Bass on Friday, Ross is like, I don't think Anthony Bass desires to be hateful to anybody. It's like the dude just doubled down yesterday on all of it. These are my beliefs. These are my beliefs. You call somebody demonic and satanic, or their lifestyle, air quotes, demonic or satanic, there's no other way to interpret that.
And as you
like
pointed,
the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. Just the level of ignorance and stupidity here. And these guys fire people who challenge them. They don't want anything but yes people around. And when you have that, this is what you get. Nobody's comfortable or confident to walk into Ross Atkins' office. It wouldn't embarrass him. Nobody would have to know. Close the door, sit down one-on-one and say, Ross, we're not doing this properly, and here's how we need to do it. And then come to some sort of arrangement that is functional, that works, and then go and deal with things. This game of avoidance and stuff, there's nobody, because they don't want people in their employ who challenge them. That's their culture. They're the kings. Don't ask questions, despite their bullshit about open door policies and culture and values. That's who they are. It's who they've always been.
As you pointed out earlier, the fact that he kept using that Anthony Bass kept using the word decisions showed ignorance, showed total ignorance of it. And the fact that the Blue Jays didn't want him answering questions. Kevin Pillar answered questions right away from media after he had done his thing in Atlanta. But the Jays knew that allowing Anthony Bass to speak on his own behalf, using his own words, would not turn out well. So if they knew that, I don't know why this thing went on for over a full week instead of just deciding, running things by the union, running things by the agency, running things by MLB, and then just cutting bait. I just don't see why that happened or did not happen.
Yeah. And I don't want to get too down the rabbit hole here because I can digress for days. But it occurs to me about the peer pressure, right? So, if you grow up in a fundamentalist environment, your family, your social circle, all of that is developed for you at a very early age. You're sort of taught what to believe, taught what you can question, taught what you can't question. You're told that you're to be a, quote, light in a, quote, dark world, that you can expect pushback, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it could just be a whole lot of ignorance from Anthony Bass, but specific to the Bible. Like, you want to talk about cherry picking, that too has to do with peer pressure. It's easy to pick on LGBTQ plus people, because it's so in vogue right now. Laws are being changed in the southern United States. Really, real life dangerous stuff is happening as it pertains to the LGBTQ plus community, particularly the T in that LGBTQ plus transgender folks. And so it's real easy to pick on them because you're not going to get any pushback in the clubhouse. But I can tell you this, the 7th of the 10 commandments is thou shalt not commit adultery. And anyone who's been in a professional sports locker room, clubhouse, knows that there are individuals who go on road trips and routinely commit adultery. I guarantee you that Anthony Bass is not admonishing teammates who he may be aware are committing adultery. And the reason he's not, aside from the fact that he's cherry picking from the Bible, is that there is a social circle and a peer pressure that would push back against that. And so it's real easy to go at people who either don't exist in your clubhouse, or in the case of the Toronto Blue Jays, for sure, if one or more do, they're certainly not coming out now. They're certainly not coming out now, not playing for that team. It's easier to go at them than it is to go at things that go against the Bible that routinely happen within your social circle. So it's gutless and it's cowardice. And by the way, do what you want with your own life. This is not me judging adultery. I don't give a shit. What I'm saying is you shouldn't give a shit either about LGBTQ plus people just going on and living their lives. Live and let live, and whatever consequences you suffer in your own life from the decisions you make, you work out with yourself and with the people in your own life. I ain't going to judge you for that. But screw off and leave us alone, because it's hard to wake up every morning and read a story or see a headline or hear something or see something where our very existence as human beings is being litigated by people who want to bring us harm. And that's where the outrage comes from. It's not an attempt to throw our, again, air quote, because I hate this word, lifestyle in your face. It's that we are very really being litigated against. There are very real people in our community who are paying very real prices on this continent right now. Not talking about the other side of the world where we like to think that things are backward and we're so forward here. This is real life stuff, and real lives are affected. And if we don't care about that, then who are we really as a society?
And then the bottom line here is that nobody should feel that Anthony Bass is being persecuted and denied or taken away his freedom of speech, because that's a ridiculous argument. I mean, nobody is telling him he can't feel that way or he can't say that, but it doesn't mean that he's guaranteed employment by the Toronto Blue Jays or by Major League Baseball. He can say that as much as he wants, but there are repercussions, and he's finding out.
All right, let's talk a little baseball. So I done tweet something, Griff. And really, if you haven't tweeted it, did you ever think it? Right? I mean, if it's not on Twitter in the moment, you can't prove that you thought it. But this one's a little different because there's no date stamp or timeliness to it. But you know me, I've followed the Chicago Cubs for a long time, actually, and I was going to wait until late August. But we are coming up on the 30th anniversary of me catching a foul ball at Wrigley Field. August 31st, 1993, the Cubs were playing the team, the Phillies, that the Blue Jays would eventually beat in the World Series that year. Mark Grace, 2 balls and 1 strike. Ben Rivera of the Philadelphia Phillies threw the pitch. And I was at my first ever game with my family, first ever game at Wrigley Field. And I was the Cubs fan of the group, 14 years old. Caught a bit of a zinger of a foul ball, became a bit of a celebrity in the area for the rest of the game because I was a young kid and people thought it was cool, and I caught it with my bare hand and all that. But now I'm digressing and bragging and stuff. But I'm wondering if there's a possibility here that this era of the Toronto Blue Jays becomes the Theo Epstein era Chicago Cubs without a World Series ring. Witness the struggle to develop their own pitching, and look at the starting rotation. Alek Manoah is a drafted and developed guy, and we know he's going through his struggles, but he's been terrific for the first year and a half of his career. But Barrios was acquired in a trade. Kikuchi, a free agent. Gausman, a free agent. Bassett, a free agent. No pitchers of consequence knocking on the door at the moment in the minor leagues. There are some arms, but they're not coming here today or tomorrow. Underperformance of positional stars in years where they start to get more expensive. Vladdy comes to mind. Think Javier Baez. Think Kyle Schwarber. Probably leaving. Think even Chris Bryant, who won the NL Rookie of the Year in 15, NL MVP in 16, the World Series year, but then hurt his shoulder sliding headfirst into third base in a game in 2017, and has had some injury issues that have lingered in a variety of different parts of his body ever since. And he's a shell of the player he once was. If I'm not mistaken, he's currently on the IL right now with the Colorado Rockies. having gotten off to a slow start for a second consecutive year with them. So, and think back to the Cubs rotation: Lester, free agent; Lackey, free agent; Arrieta, that steal of a trade with the Baltimore Orioles. Kyle Hendricks was a trade with the Texas Rangers, although he had not made his major league debut at the time the Cubs acquired him. Like, I see a lot of similarities, and I also see a team in playoff contention every year, but awaiting good results. Like the Cubs won their division, made the playoffs in 2017 off the World Series year, but they were kind of falling apart toward the end, and they were no match for the Dodgers in the rematch 2017 NLCS. 2018, they fell apart, having led the division for most of the year and snuck into the wild card game before Kyle Freeland and the Colorado Rockies absolutely shoved it up there you-know-what that night. 2019, they missed. 2020, they got in, but that was a COVID-shortened season, and they've gone into a rebuild since. Like, my point, Griff, is that Vladdy's getting more expensive and close to free agency in a couple of years. Bo, the same thing. This can go poof a lot quicker than it seems.
Well,
and I'm seeing comparisons here.
Yeah, I love your history, your knowledge of the history of your Cubbies, but I see a big difference, and it's good for a certain level of Blue Jays fans who don't mind teams that are competitive and year after year, going into August or early September, have a chance. And you know that because of all the renovations and all the money that Rogers has put into improving the stadium and the stadium experience, and the money they've spent on redoing the outfield, and then next year redoing the home plate end of the stadium, which is going to be nothing but private clubs and overpriced tickets, that they cannot afford to go into any sort of a rebuild mode. This Toronto Blue Jays team is stuck at mediocrity and above for the next foreseeable future, forever maybe, because of the fact that they invested so much money in the stadium, the PDC, the Player Development Complex in Dunedin, that they can't afford to tell fans, well, we're going to start fresh. We're going to have all young kids, and then in 4 or 5 years, you may see us back in contention. They can't afford to do that because they have to sell those high-priced club memberships, like private club memberships, the overpriced season tickets, and so Toronto baseball fans are not forgiving like Maple Leafs fans or Cubs fans. And we'll stick to baseball. Cubs fans for years, for almost a century, maybe for over a century, did not win a World Series. And yet they would come out because it was such a great game experience. So when Ricketts and those people built Wrigleyville around the stadium, they knew that their audience would keep coming no matter if they were in rebuild or whether they were contending for another World Series. And so I think therein lies the difference with the Jays. The Jays can't rebuild, so they will have to keep going out and getting starting pitching on the free agent or trade market and trying to win as many games, trying to win into the 90s. And then once you're in October, anything can happen.
But you gotta develop, it is hard to be the Tampa Bay Rays, and they seem to be the bar. The LA Dodgers are another team.
But what do the Rays won, though?
Well, no, they haven't. Well, yeah, they got there in 2008, but you're right. Yeah, they haven't, and they got there in the COVID shortened season as well, but didn't win 2020, the World Series. But if you have a development pipeline specifically with pitching, you have the ability to backfill. Like, I'm looking at this year, Griff, and I'm thinking to myself, well, Alek Manoah has gone through a really difficult time. He's not even here right now. Yusei Kikuchi is a 5 who's been forced to be a 4 because of that. You're a Kevin Gausman, certainly Kevin Gausman, to a slightly lesser extent, but it would still be pretty significant. Chris Bassett, injury away from a real problem here. Like a real problem, because you don't have we could call up so-and-so from AA, throw him on the 40-man roster for the first time and have him make a couple of spot starts and see what he can do. Right? It's an old school. It's an old school. I know I'm dating myself, and life was different back then. And he pitched in the minor leagues for 6 years, throwing like 150 innings per year. But there's no Juan Guzman to arrive when Dave Steeb's back finally betrays him. Right?
I think Bowden Francis has a chance to be a 100 pitch pitcher who could fit in the 4 or 5 spot. But this Blue Jays team had good health in their rotation, and that's from researching these guys and just signing players who have a history of taking the ball every 5 days. So to look to the minor leagues and say they don't have anybody there, they haven't needed anybody there. And Bowden Francis came up. He had a great winter league season. He was hurt a little bit early this year, but from what we've seen of him, if you're just looking for a 4th or 5th starter, say a 5th starter, he's a guy that we don't know, that they don't know what they've got in him. He's in his late 20s, late developer, but just going off what he did in the Caribbean Winter League and then what he showed the other day, I think it's a little early to say that they have nothing down there. I mean, Mitch White has had his chance. I don't think Mitch White is going to be a 2023 contributor to the rotation. And they've had a couple injuries at AA. So, yeah, they're thin, but they haven't needed anybody as a 6th starter. And Scotty, that like by the end of the season, you'll have used 10, 11, 12 starters in most seasons. And so the Jays have been very lucky. I'm not going to go there and say that they're toast if one of those top 3 guys gets hurt. We'll just have to wait and see. But they are going to go deeper into the need for starting pitchers, and other than Bowden Francis, not too many are ready right now.
I'm just looking because I have a name in mind. He had a no-hitter into the 8th inning over the weekend in San Francisco and had a terrific start, a start or 2 before that. Kyle Hendricks. Now, I know he doesn't throw hard, but you could slot him into the middle of the rotation. If the Cubs start selling, man, Kyle Hendricks might be a guy they could go get. Now, he is up at the end of the year, except there is a $16 million vesting option for next year with a $1.5 million buyout if it vests and you don't want him. And that's if Hendricks finishes top 3 in the 2020 Cy Young voting. Oh, okay. So did he? I've got to now go up and look because this is already dealt with the vesting option. He finished 9th. So no, there's no vesting option. He's a free agent at the end of the year.
Yeah. I mean,
go get him.
Yeah. That's a name. I remember when, Josh Johnson and Mark Burley came from the Marlins in the 2013 deal, 2014, what? 13.
12 into 13.
Yeah. And everybody's going, oh, Josh Johnson is the next great thing. And it was Mark Burley that stayed with the team, soft tossing, quick working. Pitch clock would have meant nothing to him. It would have slowed him down,
Johnson was betrayed by injuries. Yeah.
Yeah, and then Burley was there when they went to the playoffs and came, within a series of going to the World Series. So, like, I'm a big fan of Hendricks. I would.
Well, and he started Game 7. He started Game 7 of the 2016 World Series. I like Griff, which would mean nothing right now if he wasn't pitching as well as he has been lately, because he did dive last year.
Yeah.
But the fact that he's back to pitching well, he's got the playoff pedigree. He started Game 7 of the World Series. He would have gone much deeper into Game 7 of the 2016 World Series if the Cubs weren't managed by the genius. It only took me 6 episodes to get a Joe Madden shot in. The genius.
I've done some. I dug deep here in the Jays rotation and why they were able to send Bowden Francis back to the minor leagues. And I went through with the off days moving forward, that Manoah spot that that was on Saturday, that Manoa spot will only be needed 3 times through July 27th. Looking at using the off days and having guys go every 5th day, having the other 4 pitchers go every 5th day surrounding the off days that are on the schedule. You're going to just need that number 5 spot on June the 18th, July the 1st, and July 22nd coming out of the All-Star break. So that's 3 times in the next.
You're going to do a bullpen game on Canada Day?
Yeah. Well,
the greatest controversy since Vladdy didn't play on Victoria Day.
Oh,
a
God.
bullpen day on Canada Day.
I'm having flashbacks here. But
PTSD.
Maybe a young Canadian could jump in. Maybe Romano could start that game, and we could be all patriotic about it. But
is Jeff Francis available? I mean, why not?
Bowden Francis is. We could just
Bowden Francis is.
Say who it is. We don't even have to change the jersey.
Speaking of Canadian baseball, Griff, as we put the wraps on episode 6 here of Exit Philosophy, big weekend every year. The Hall of Fame, Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame in St. Mary's, Ontario. It's induction weekend coming up this weekend, and you're obviously heavily involved. You're a Jack Graney Award winner. Big weekend, and some great names are going in.
Yeah, I'm a voter too, so it's very important for me, and I've been down as far back as I can remember, and it's always great. I mean, St. Mary's, for those who have never been to St. Mary's, it has a little tinge of Cooperstown to it. Small town, it shuts down for the weekend. The museum's in a rustic environment with a great little ballpark nearby. And this year is Jesse Barfield finally getting in. I don't know what took so long, but he's the 3rd member of that great outfield, that great Blue Jays outfield to go in. Denny Boucher, who pitched for both the Blue Jays and the Expos, and I got a great little memory of his debut, September 6, 93. Denny Boucher making his debut in his hometown. He's from Lachine, Quebec, and he was starting the game. Joe Siddle caught him in that game. Siddle had been catching in Ottawa, had been playing in Ottawa, and he came up for and they formed the first all-Canadian battery since, or in the 20th century. And Larry Walker played right field that game, so 3 Canadians in the lineup. Walker homered and stole a base. Boucher pitched 6 innings, and what I remember is La Presse making a big deal of a Tigard de Chez Nous coming back and pitching in his hometown. And they sent photographers who had no idea, never done baseball, never done sports. And Siddle is getting down in the crouch in the bullpen, which is on the field down the right field line. And Siddle gets in his crouch, and Boucher is on the mound, and the La Presse photographer was standing right between them, taking shots of Denny. And Boucher is there. I have to throw to that guy over there behind you.
I don't want to hit you in the face.
The guy went, "Oh, pardon," and he walked away. He got out of the way. But it was, I just couldn't believe, because they spent the afternoon with Denny Boucher at his home, or the morning, because it was a day game, a 108 start. They spent the morning with him at his home. So his prep involved talking to La Presse photographers and reporters, and then coming with them to the ballpark. And for him to accomplish what he did, and Denny, a great guy, and became a scout, coach with the Canadian national team, tremendous personality and a great person. And so he's going in on Saturday. And Rich Harden, who if not for injuries would have had a great career, but was solid strikeout pitcher, like dynamic. I remember watching him pitch a few times, and I would pay to see this guy pitch it when he was healthy. He was great. And then
Cubs got him, Griff. Cubs got him from Oakland in 2008.
Right.
And he pitched great for them down the stretch. That was one of the Pinella years where they went to the playoffs and fell apart, but Harden was awesome for them when they got him.
And then John Olerud, who was voted in 2020, wasn't able to make it, so he's going to come down. and be a part of the ceremony and be inducted officially on Saturday, this coming Saturday. It's a great afternoon on this. If you just drive with your kids, drive with your family down. They closed the downtown of St. Mary's, which is about 2 blocks. but so be it. But
the IGA and the Home Hardware.
Oh, yeah. And then on, I think Saturday morning, they're also, Ferguson Jenkins is going to be there, and they're dedicating Ferguson Jenkins Way, which is the street running in front of the museum. So I just wanted to get a plug in on Exit Philosophy for the Hall of Fame, which is near and dear to my heart.
Absolutely. Wonderful, wonderful celebration of Canadian baseball. When you scrum, guys, ask Olerud about Luis Arias. How far does Oli think Arias can get into the season hitting around 400?
I'm all
over. Remember
it.
Olerud in 93, how much fun that was? And it's a different world because high leverage relievers, flamethrowers. You don't see the starter the third time through today like you did back then, but Olerud's perspective on that would be awesome.
I'm all over that. That'll be on griffsthepitch.com at some point down the road. Definitely.
There you go. Yeah. Rack up some interviews for griffsthepitch.com
over the course of the weekend. Yep.
Well, we cover it all here on Exit Philosophy, and that puts a wrap on episode 6. Griff and I will be back with you next Monday for episode 7. The Jays will have been in Baltimore and will have been in Texas. And both of those series matter because the Rangers are a pretty good team, if you haven't checked. And one of Texas or Houston, the team that doesn't win the American League West, is going to be in the wild card conversation all year long. So there's some big games, and then the road trip concludes in the middle of next week in Miami, a little interleague play against the Marlins. So the Jays are out of town for a while here with some important opponents, and we'll be back to break it all down.
Thanks, Scotty. Nice job.
Thank you for listening.